All right, week 34, outlook number 1, starting with the pound futures. Well, we officially reached the target that we have talked about in the previous outlooks for the past, I think, like 2 weeks now. The analysis, if you were following it, it should have been pretty clear, detailing out where price was going, how we got there, and so on and so forth. And so now that we've reached this, we need to assess what is going to happen. So the first thing that we should take note of is the immediate response from at the high. Well, the immediate response is a liquidity draw, and that's based on the fact that we did not close with this body that immediately closed the candle above the high, and we also created basically a high immediately afterwards, or in the process of clearing this liquidity point here, which is that high. So because of that, we need to be cognizant of the fact that price could very well pull back into a deeper liquidity pool if it wants to move higher. It doesn't necessarily have to just continue moving higher here, and the indication of that based on structure is the fact that we do have a liquidity draw. Now, if this was a break of structure, I would be more inclined to say that price is going to continue with the bullish price action in the immediate. But because it is a liquidity draw, and because we have not only one high, but then another high, this is possible that we could be pulling back into some sort of inefficient pricing to get more liquidity and balance the liquidity that was just mitigated here in the orders that were activated in order to propel us higher. So what we're looking at, just moving from words to graphics, is we could be looking at something like this, and then here. So that's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 is the fact that we do have a liquidity draw. And so if this is the target that price was looking to achieve, and now we could be looking for a sell-off, we have tons of sell-side liquidity in the fact that these are lows. So these structural points or these liquidity points here at these lows are liquidity points. So because of that, price very well could start moving towards these lows. And scenario number 2 is what we could get is a failure to continue higher as we pull back into not only this, I highly doubt that this is going to hold, but if we pull back into this liquidity or this inefficiency here and this ends up failing, what we could get is continuation lower to this the first liquidity point / structural point, which is the low that took out this high, the low that led to the takeout of the high. And then we would have to assess what the action would be there. Will it be a liquidity draw or will it be a break of structure? And the other thing to note is we still have this inefficient pricing here. This is still a very valid inefficient pricing. And that's something that I'm taking note of. Even though we got a liquidity draw based off of this low here, we have a liquidity where we reached towards this inefficient pricing, but we failed to mitigate it, and that led to the break here. But what we also need to note is the fact that this mitigation of this inefficient pricing here, it did lead to the break or mitigation of this high here. And so seeing that price intended to come back and mitigate or balance out this inefficiency but failed to do so and then achieve the target, it is likely that price will pull back to mitigate this order, not only filling the inefficiency but performing a liquidity draw at the low that led to break this high, which is one of the many tricks that price does when people are, following the trend and getting comfortable with it, because we've seen a really clean price action of highs and lows. And then price will be like, oh, okay, well, we have a new low, we have a new high. The logical thing to do for price would be to come back into inefficiency and then move higher. But we have to take note of the way that price broke these highs as we were ascending. And so it is likely that this ends up failing. Price pulls back to mitigate this low, balancing the inefficiency, and then moving higher. All right, so that's scenario number 2. And then obviously scenario number 3 is we just continue to move higher from there. All right, so those are 3 scenarios that I'm seeing for the British pound futures. Now, for the NASDAQ. All right, so we ended up failing this continuation of price action to move lower. We actually ended up getting We ended up getting unwillingness, and we just basically generated a whole bunch of unwillingness. We had a liquidity draw, and ultimately price decided to move higher. So that ended up invalidating the area of interest that we were looking at, which is what we were discussing in the previous outlook. So that is gone. That is gone there. This liquidity draw is no longer valid, and we ultimately broke 2 liquidity points. We definitely were looking for price to break this high. We knew that was probably going to happen. These are just relatively equal highs. It just makes a lot of sense. But based off the current price action, this area of interest was valid. As you can see, it did give a very valid response, but it ultimately failed as the liquidity pools that are higher have much more depth to them than what was right here in order to send price lower. So because of that, we ended up breaking structure here. We ended up performing liquidity draw here. And as you can see, after the liquidity draw, we are getting a very valid response to move lower. So what we want to see is, does this liquidity draw hold, or are we going to start moving towards the last high before we start reaching for the all-time highs? That is yet to be seen. But as of right now, this is what we're playing with. We need to see a little bit more price action. Is price going to break this low, immediate low? If it does, then we'll look for inefficient pricing to fill, then an area of interest to be created, and then target that and then move lower. Or is price going to liquidity draw this low and move higher? That's scenario number 2. Or are we going to just do consolidation again like we did here? All right, so that's what we're looking at. Not really too much to discuss here for the NASDAQ futures or NQ. All right, and then on the Dow Jones, yep, as we discussed, this is a price leg. We have the low, we have the high. We were expecting price to pull back, and that's exactly what it's doing. It's filled this inefficient pricing almost completely. I would say 100% filled, to be honest, but it doesn't really matter because this inefficient pricing, if we are to mark out how it looks from a range perspective, is still on the premium side. So even entering from buys in this area would be futile. So what we should be looking for is for price to continue lower, or we could look for price to reverse and move higher back into the premium, because this is basically, it's not technically a macro range as in the sense of like the phase, but a price leg itself is like sort of a mini range. So we could be playing around inside of this area, pulling back into the premium. We do have relatively equal highs that I want to note here. So that's indication that there is something in this area that still could be valid. But sticking with the immediate price action, the momentum is showing clear selling. So we could be looking to pull back deeper, or we're pulling back to the equilibrium of the price leg / range altogether. But we could be looking to move into the discount side, in which we would have to look for inefficient pricing to be mitigated and filled or balanced. And then what we would look after that is for continuation of the current trend, as this would just be a pullback and then continuation. Or what we could do is get complete failure of this price leg and break the structural point. And then if we break, depending on the structural action, as always, if there's a break of structure, we transition phases into a range. If it's a liquidity draw, we shift the structural point and most likely look to move higher again, continuing on with the bullish run. All right, so that is it for week 34 outlook number 1. I'm actually gonna clear a few of these things. I'm gonna keep this on here. I think we're pretty clear on that. Oh yeah, back to the, I think it was, yeah, pound futures. All right, cool. So I think we're pretty much clear on this. Get rid of all this stuff, clear up these charts a little bit. Get rid of these. We know, you can always go back and watch the videos. We know this high is here, but I'm just gonna annotate it as of right now to change the annotation that this is a liquidity draw. All right. We have this liquidity draw. This is no longer important. That's not really important. I'll leave this up here because we are seeing that this is a possibility. The price could come back here. And I believe that is it. Yep. And so the last high that we're looking for, which is the next target, would be this high here. All right. Week 34, outlook number 1. Peace.